No, please, no.
On July 25th, 1984, San Francisco police receive a distressing call.
911, where's your emergency?
Harvey Dubbs, his wife Deborah, and their baby son Sean have vanished.
In my 20 years of investigating missing person cases, we'd never had an entire family reported missing. So it was very suspicious, especially the circumstances under which they disappeared.
Harvey had video equipment, sophisticated video equipment that he used as a side business. The last person who ever spoke with Deborah Dubbs or any of the Dubbs family was a neighbor and good friend of Deborah. And on a telephone conversation, she said that someone's coming over to look at Harvey's video equipment tonight with the idea of renting it. That's the last time anyone ever heard from the Dubbs family.
The following day, San Francisco police dispatched to the Dubbs residence.
My partner and I did an entire search of the house. Deborah was meticulous. She never left the house in disarray. At the time we searched, there were dirty dishes in the sink. It wasn't a tidy house that Deborah would have kept. We noticed that on the closet door, there was what looked to be phone cord that was tied to the knob. In noticing that the ends had been cut, it looked like it had been used to secure someone to the door. Deborah's father had told us that there was one pair of jogging shoes that Harvey always wore. We found those in the closet.
And all of Harvey's video equipment is missing.
There were outlines of dust showing where things had been. We found numerous lists, extensively listing what pieces of equipment he had along with it.
Authorities fear something horrible may have happened to the family.
You can't help but get emotionally involved, especially when there's a small child and a really nice young innocent couple who were just going through life. It's just devastating.
Investigators question residents.
The neighbors did report seeing a bearded man and an Asian man in and out of the house at about the time they went missing.
Police get a description of the two men.
After we had compiled all the information, the composite sketches, the serial numbers, we made up crime information bulletins. We mailed them out to every department in the state of California, and unfortunately, nothing came of it.
The Dubbs family becomes another file in the massive caseload.
On average, the missing persons detail handled approximately 350 to 400 cases a month.
Four months later, authorities investigate another mysterious disappearance. 39-year-old Paul Cosner, an auto salesman in San Francisco, vanishes one night.
Paul Cosner had a dinner date with his girlfriend and called her at about 7 o'clock to say, I'll be a little late, about 7:30. I have a possible buyer for my car, and I have to take him for a test drive. And Paul Cosner was never seen again.
We made up missing person bulletins. We obtained the VIN number and the license plate number of his Honda Prelude. Those were entered into the national system.
As with the Dubs family, the Cosner investigation reaches a dead end.
There had been no contact between the missing people and their very close families. There had been no activity on their credit cards. No one had seen them. They had fallen off the face of the earth.
Seven months later, on June 2nd, 1985, South San Francisco police receive a call about a simple shoplifting incident at a local lumber yard.
They had been in here before, for about 2 months they had been coming inside the store here.
One of the men steals a vise.
One of our employees chased after him, but he took off and ran up the street, and that was it. And the other guy stayed inside the store. He said he's willing to pay for the vise and any other stuff that he may have taken. Very nice about the whole thing. And as a matter of fact, it's no big deal. We could just let this thing go and we can move on, and that's it, I'll pay for everything. I told him no. That wasn't going to happen.
Police soon arrive, and the owner shows them the open trunk of a Honda Prelude, where the thief placed the stolen item.
I saw the vise, it was in plain view. There were several other tools with price tags on it. As I started to move some of the tools around, I discovered a canvas bag. I opened it up and I found the automatic weapon in there with a silencer on it. At this time, a gentleman, a bearded man, came out, walked up to us and said, officers, it's been a misunderstanding. A friend took this, he thought I was going to, pay for it. Once I brought up the part about the weapon, and his whole demeanor changed. Very nervous, agitated.
Police get the man's driver's license, which identifies him as Robin Scott Stapley. The gun is registered in his name.
It's a felony in the state of California to possess a firearm with a silencer. And it's not something you just walk away from, you have to be arrested.
He also notes that the photo on the driver's license doesn't look like the man standing before him.
I ran the license plate, and it came back to Bond was the last name. I ran the VIN number, came back to a Paul Cosner.
Paul Cosner had been reported missing out of San Francisco some months earlier, and no one had seen him or had any indication of where he was for a very long time.
Once that hit, a lot of bells and whistles went off with the department.
At the police station, investigators ask the man why he is driving Cosner's car with stolen plates. The suspect finally admits that his name is actually Leonard Lake. And the man who took the vise is Charles Ng.
First he asked for a note paper, and he wrote a note to his family. And then he asked for a glass of water.
Lake suddenly collapses. Investigators read Lake's letter and find it is a suicide note.
Leonard Lake had a terrible fear of being imprisoned. He had been in jail a very short time, and he told numerous friends and his wife that I will never be in prison again. I carry cyanide, and if I'm captured, I will kill myself.
Police wonder why someone would take such drastic measures.
I received a phone call that Paul Cosner's vehicle had been found and that they had taken one person into custody and that he was in a coma and that there was another person that had been with him that had escaped.
San Francisco police take over the case and inspect the car. They find numerous IDs, receipts, and credit cards, as well as an electric bill for an address in Wilseyville, California. Wilseyville is a rural community in Calaveras County, in the rolling foothills of the Sierra Mountains. Police track down the woman whose name is on the bill, Claralyn Balaz, and find she is Leonard Lake's ex-wife. She tells them that she no longer lives at the house listed on the bill.
And later on, she told us that the property belonged to her. She did admit that Leonard Lake was staying on the property and that occasionally his friend Charlie Ng would stay there on weekends.
Claralyn agrees to let investigators search the place for any clues as to Charles Ng's whereabouts or the missing person, Paul Cosner.
So we made arrangements to meet the following morning.
The property in Wilseyville covers 2.5 acres.
You had a feeling of unease when you went there. You were extremely isolated. We went inside, took our time, found a lot of things that were unsettling. There was a bed with a wooden frame around it with eye bolts screwed into each corner, blood on the mattress. There were numerous pieces of lacy underwear for women in various sizes. I noticed on the shelves various pieces of video equipment. I recognized one as being identical to that which had been reported stolen from the Dubs residence. Unfortunately, I happened to say, "Oh, at which point she demanded that we stop searching and leave the premises.
They return the next day with a warrant and run the tags on all the cars parked on the property.
The two vehicles belonged to Robin Scott Stapley. They were registered out of San Diego County.
Authorities note that when Lake was arrested, he had Stapley's driver's license.
Stapley had come up to the Wilseyville area with a young couple, Lonnie Bond, his girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, and their 16-month-old baby, Lonnie Bond Jr.
Investigators recall that Lake was driving Paul Cosner's car with Lonnie Bond's license plates. Police determined they had rented the house next to Leonard Lake's.
We made contact with the owner of the piece of property, and they told us that they had rented the property out to a family and that they disappeared. They just didn't pay the rent and they left the area. And so now we know we got an entire family missing next door.
The list of missing people grows.
We originally had the Dubs family, that's 3, and then we had Paul Cosner.
Now, Lonnie Bond, Brenda O'Connor, Lonnie Jr., and Robin Scott Stapley are all missing.
At this point, we knew something horrendous had happened to everybody involved. Had the feeling that all of these people were victims of homicides.
Investigators continue to search.
One of the first things that we had decided to look at was a disturbed area across the driveway. When we started to dig, just only a few inches under the soil, the top of the soil, we came across some bones. We took those items to the Department of Justice Crime Lab. They looked at it, and they said that they felt that this was human bones. Our gut feeling is that this thing could spread and be very big. It's going to take a lot of manpower to do this and a lot of equipment.
While they wait for assistance to arrive, police question the property's owner, Clara Lynn Balaz. She gives investigators their first glimpse into the demented mind of her ex-husband, Leonard Lake.
What we know about Leonard Lake's childhood is little, but what we do know is really quite disturbing. Apparently, his mother was rather promiscuous. The inappropriate sexuality sets up a child for tremendous anxiety because it stimulates both curiosity and fear. So the child becomes very preoccupied with sex, even though it's frightening, unknown, inappropriate. And this is the way that a fetish or an obsession becomes established.
Lake's mother later abandoned him, and he was sent to live with relatives.
When there's anxiety and inappropriate sexuality in the household, to then have your mother leave would be particularly traumatic.
When he was 18, Lake entered the military.
Leonard Lake joined the U.S. Marines and actually served in Vietnam. He was later diagnosed with impending schizophrenia and discharged.
He had delusions of grandeur. He thought he was going to be the only one to survive the apocalypse. He thought he would be the man to repopulate the planet.
Lake returned to California, and in 1980, he met Clara Lynn at a local fair. The two clicked immediately and had many of the same interests. They married a year later and were soon introduced to Charles Ng through a mutual friend. Charles Ng carried a lot of anger with him.
But it was when he paired up with Leonard Lake that he was offered the opportunity to engage and enact all of his bitterness and rage.
Ng's fury started building early in life while growing up in China.
We know from the very beginning that he wasn't a wanted child. We also know that his mother was fairly harsh with him. His father was a stern disciplinarian throughout his life. All of these are a setup for the development of cruelty or bullying behavior.
Charles Ng came to California when his parents sent him here to attend a school in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Shortly after his 18th birthday, Charles Ng faked an American birth certificate and enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps.
I don't think the military worked out for Charlie because he didn't respond well to authority. He thought he knew better, he thought he was smarter, he thought he had better answers, and he didn't like being told what to do.
He decided he'd steal some weapons to make some profit. He did, and was caught soon, and was in the process of being court-martialed when a couple of guards relaxed a little and he walked away. He went to the airport, caught a plane back to California, and soon hooked up with Leonard Lake.
Ng stayed with Lake and Clara Lynn, hiding out and doing odd jobs for them.
And this was more of a family experience than Charlie Ng had ever received. Charles Ng got some of the attention and approval that he missed throughout his entire life from Leonard Lake. And this just fueled and nourished his desire to please Leonard.
As their partnership grows, Lake and Ng discover each other's dark side.
But Leonard's fantasy was really complete control, not just over women, but over every aspect of his life. Charles had fantasies of being powerful. He had fantasies of being a ninja warrior or a special forces soldier.
In 1982, federal agents locate Ng through a tip and arrest him on the weapons theft and desertion charges. They also arrest Leonard Lake for possession of stolen weapons, but Clara Lynn bails him out. Fearing jail time, he skips his court appearance and goes into hiding. Clara Lynn refuses to join him.
She chose not to live the life of a fugitive where they're constantly on the run, and they separated and divorced. But yet they maintained their relationship for years afterwards.
While Ng serves over 2 years in prison, Clara Lynn allows Lake to stay on her property in Wilseyville while she stays with family.
It's an excellent place for a fugitive hideout. It's rural. The access is a long 200-yard driveway with a gate. It would be really hard to find a fugitive up there.
When Ng is released from prison in 1984, he joins Lake at the Wilseyville house. Together, they make their fantasies a reality. The investigation into a simple shoplifting charge blows up when police connect suspects Leonard Lake and Charles Ng to the disappearance of 8 people.
This particular investigation was different than most cases that we've investigated in the sense that instead of finding victims and then working to find out who the suspects were, we had found the suspects and we were trying to find out who the victims were. We were working backwards from the suspects to the crimes, and that made it very difficult for us.
Searching the property in Wilseyville, California, police discover a cinder block bunker.
I don't think it was obvious what the bunker actually was meant to be until the investigators had a look at it, and they paced the outer perimeter. And that made them have a closer look.
Well, when you first walk into it, it looks like any kind of a tool shed. It had a workbench, it had tools, it had nuts and bolts and screws.
They saw some odd piano hinges on one wall at a bookshelf. When they swung that open, they discovered the real horror.
There was one room which was only about 7 feet long and about 3 feet wide, and there was just a plywood platform to be used as a bed, and there was a bucket that you could use to relieve yourself and a roll of toilet paper. And then there was in one of the walls a small window opening that had a one-way mirror so that a person certainly couldn't see out, but somebody from within the other side of that wall could look in and watch.
We immediately felt at this point in time, this is a holding cell for somebody.
Inside the bunker, Leonard Lake had posted a tight set of rules. It contained 6 very specific requirements for them to follow. 1, I must always be ready to service my master. I must be clean, never brushed, and made up. 3, I must never show my disrespect, either verbally or silent. 5, I must always be quiet, basic myself. I must remember and obey. To my master will be grounds for punishment.
How did anybody feel that was in here under their control? I bet you it must have been just a horrible feeling day in and day out.
Outside, dozens of searchers continue to scour the property.
In front of the house, the inspectors found a soft spot in the dirt. In digging it up, they found a 5-gallon drum. What was found inside the drum was Leonard Lake's journals, driver's license, checkbooks, IDs belonging to Deborah Dubs and Harvey Dubs and Paul Cosner. Also, 2 videotapes.
Lake's diaries provide further insight into his deranged fantasies.
Leonard Lake had kept a detailed journal over a period of nearly 2 years. In it, he referred to the book, The Collector.
It's about a simple man who is a butterfly collector. He gets in his mind the idea that he will capture a woman and hold her. And this is what he does. He creates a space for her in his home, he kidnaps her, and he holds her like one of the butterflies in his collection.
Lake discovered the book when he was a teenager. He became fascinated by the idea of enslaving women in order to control them.
And because of his psychological makeup, he kind of latched onto this book as a manifesto. He referred to his writings and his plan later as his own manifesto. He called it Operation Miranda, named after the girl that was in this book.
When investigators watched the videotape labeled Soliloquy, they realized that Lake used the bunker to carry out his plan.
I want to be able to use a woman whenever and however I want. And when I'm tired or satiated or bored or not interested, I simply want to put her away, lock her up in a little room, get her out of my sight, out of my life. The purpose of that cell and the main purpose, hence, of the building will be the imprisonment of a young lady who probably at this moment is unknown to me.
The videotapes really gave us a sense of what Leonard Lake was like, what he was thinking, talking about enslaving women, having them submit to his sexual fantasies, that they were going to be basically used for sex, cooking, house cleaning.
With Leonard Lake, we had both a sociopathic personality, which is someone who has complete and utter disregard for the rules, but we also know he had a very strong narcissistic component. His control and his obsession with making sure every element of the manifesto was met in a very specific way.
Well, the bunker describes Leonard Lake in as much as when he decides he has a fantasy and wants to fulfill it, he certainly does. The horrific monument that he actually built and then used it. He actually used it. And to be in there where these women were is horrifying, that they were trapped in there and there was nothing they could do, and it was totally dead silent in there. There was no noise whatsoever, and it was pitch black in there. It was a very sad, scary place to be.
Leonard Lake had a cold and calculated plan, but he could not fully realize it until he met Charles Ng.
We know that Leonard Lake tried to enact his manifesto several times, but wasn't able to do so. He failed. But with Charlie in partnership, they were able to create the bunker. Together, they were able to carry the manifesto out. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were a classic bully-victim pair. Leonard was the predatory bully, and I think at some level, Charlie Ng was reenacting his victimization with Leonard. And so, together, they were, in essence, a lock and key. They were a fit.
Authorities hope a second videotape labeled M-Ladies will tell them who Lake and Ng's prisoners were.
When the investigators watched the M-Ladies tape, they were horrified and stunned. They had to go outside afterwards to get a breath of air.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
In rural California, police discover a house of horrors while investigating a string of missing persons cases connected to Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. A videotape manifesto by Lake himself indicates they may have followed through with their sadistic fantasies. Investigators hope a second tape will reveal who their victims were. They see Brenda O'Connor, who along with her husband Lonnie Bond and their infant son Lonnie Jr. had disappeared after renting the house next door to Lake.
Leonard Lake was very demeaning to her. She was handcuffed. He was telling her that he wanted her to submit to his and every wishes, whether it be cooking, cleaning the house, or any sexual favors that he wanted. Brenda was crying for her baby. Leonard Lake said he's sleeping like a rock. That's just a matter of fact.
It was astounding and horrifying to see the fear Brenda illustrated. It's very, very disturbing to see someone in that raw footage, and it's not a fantasy, it's really happening to her.
One of the most prominent elements of the videotapes is to watch Leonard Lake's behavior. He is so cool, even to the point of a quiet voice. Nothing ruffles him. It's so clear that he has a plan. He's following his plan. He's meticulous in detail.
Charles Ng was like a wild animal. He was cutting her clothes away, no regard for her. It was just like this was going to be his reward.
The pleasure is in the pain. It's about the process of torturing them, seeing them suffer, making them be the victim that he hated being, making them the vulnerable that he hated to feel.
Also on the M Lady's videotape is a woman identified only as Kathy.
Kathy obviously was very, very scared, but I think almost scared to a point of shock, which it seemed as though wasn't even comprehensive of what was happening yet. She obviously didn't want to do what they were asking her to do, which was to remove her clothes.
Everyone in there would just couldn't believe what they were seeing, this torture of these women, this blatant, violent, cruel acts.
Further investigation reveals that Kathy is 18-year-old Kathy Allen, who disappeared 2 months earlier on April 14th, 1985.
Kathy Allen was the girlfriend of a man Charles Ng had known in Folsom Prison. Through that connection, Lake discovered the existence of Kathy Allen, and they first captured the boyfriend and killed him, and then telephoned Kathy and said, "We have your boyfriend. He wants to see you." They drove down to San Francisco and brought Kathy back up to the Wilseyville cabin. And she suffered some horrors, and she was imprisoned in the little cell.
With every act that these two men undertook, they were brought closer and closer and closer together. For Leonard Lake, he had the plan. He needed Charlie in the circle in order to carry out the plan. It was a private club of two.
As the massive search at the Wilseyville property continues, investigators calculate the true scope of Lake and Ng's crimes.
There were thousands of pieces of evidence that we discovered there. We found probably in the vicinity of about 50 pounds of charred human remains. There were 5 complete bodies, part of a 6th body that was discovered. 2 of the bodies were wrapped in a plastic. After they'd been stuffed inside of a sleeping bag, they were bound and gagged, and there are handcuffs behind their backs. It looked like they had been shot in the head. We found other people who had been buried on the site who had also been shot in the head.
We know for certain that 11 victims were killed and the remains were buried here. There's a number of others that we're not sure about.
In all, police suspect that up to 25 people were killed by Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. As authorities search for a motive, a pattern emerges.
Lake and Ng chose victims for 2 reasons. First, they wanted female victims to use as sex slaves. Second, they wanted male victims from whom they could profit. It was almost as if they went on shopping trips. For the male victims, they chose to acquire either a car or video equipment, or in some cases even to steal their identities and cash their income checks.
Investigators discovered 2 more victims connected to Lake and Ng: Cliff Parento and Jeff Gerald.
A few of the people that Charles Ng worked with were murder victims as well, and it's believed that they held a little bit higher position within the company that he worked for, and he wanted that stature. He wanted to be able to have a little seniority, and so by simply eliminating those people, that would put him into that position.
As news of the massacre spreads, the quiet, rural community of Wilseyville is horrified.
I don't think I could ever understand why people would do this to another human being. How anyone could be so inhumane to wonderful people.
Cases of psychotic thinking, like a delusional disorder or schizophrenia, a person does know the difference between right and wrong in some instances. In Leonard Lake's case, we have his own words. I know I'm dangerous. If society knew what I was up to, they'd be afraid.
Investigators have many questions, but Leonard Lake cannot answer them. 4 days after ingesting cyanide in a San Francisco police station, Lake remains in a coma. His condition irreversible. Doctors disconnect his life support system, and he dies within seconds.
By taking the cyanide capsule at the jail, he one-upped the police. One last time, he showed his power, his cleverness, his grandeur, and in this way, he maintained complete control.
That leaves Charles Ng. After suspected serial killer Leonard Lake dies, his partner in crime, Charles Ng, is still on the run in California.
When Leonard Lake committed suicide and left Charlie on his own, for Charlie, this was another reenactment of the abandonment when he was shipped out to boarding school, of being left on his own again, and all he could really do was hightail it and run.
Through informants, police learned that Charles Ng flew to Chicago. Chicago police organize an aggressive search for the fugitive, but can't locate him.
We were aware that he had relatives in Canada. In the Toronto area is where we felt he could be going, but we also knew that he had contacts in Calgary.
The FBI alerts Canadian authorities. They warn that Charles Ng is extremely dangerous. On July 6, 1985, Charles Ng enters a Canadian department store.
And he was caught shoplifting.
I'm not convinced that Ng had an obsession with shoplifting. I think he thought he was really, really clever. And I think he thought he was smarter than the store clerks and the security guards.
When the security officers attempted to detain him, he pulled out a gun and shot one of the security officers. Luckily, other officers came in to assist. Charles Ng was subdued and taken into custody.
San Francisco and Calaveras County authorities fly to Canada to interview the suspect.
He didn't talk a lot. He was very short, concise, and very brief. He denied committing any murders and really was trying to push the entire incidents involving any homicides in the direction of Leonard Lake.
6 months after he fled California, a Canadian court finds Ng guilty of aggravated assault, robbery, and illegal use of a firearm for the department store incident. He receives a 4.5-year prison sentence. As he serves his time, U.S. authorities hit a roadblock when they attempt to bring Ng back to California to stand trial.
The problem of getting him back to this country was the fact that Canada did not have the death penalty. And their practice was not to release prisoners back to the United States to face death penalty charges.
After 6 years of legal wrangling, the Canadian Supreme Court hands down a ruling.
The Canadian authorities realized that if they continued to deny prisoners facing charges in the United States, then Canada could be a haven for the state's serial killers to cross the border, and they would be safe from facing the death penalty.
Finally, police have Ng in custody, but he has spent his time in jail studying the U.S. legal system.
Charles Ng, even though he had only had a high school education, was very, very adept at learning the California laws, more than most jailhouse lawyers.
Ng uses this knowledge to delay the trial whenever possible.
He continued to fire every defense team that he ever had, and every time there was a ruling that was adverse to him, he simply appealed it to the next court up. So it took us 6 years to get him out of Canada, and then it took us an additional 7 years once he was back in California to finally get to go to trial.
In jail, Ng draws cartoons that provide a glimpse into his mind and his relationship with Leonard Lake.
He took great pleasure in hurting anybody that had some vulnerability. This was kind of a form of payback to the vulnerable part of himself that he felt was responsible for his own victimization at the hands of his parents. There's no question that this shows his role as the secondary, the lesser of the two men in terms of the power and the leadership.
On October 26, 1998, 13 years after committing his crimes, Charles Ng is finally brought to trial.
It was a 12-count serial murder case, and we had somewhere in the vicinity of 175 to 200 witnesses.
Ng stands trial alone.
You can't look at Ng by himself. They're intrinsically linked. Lake and Ng, they're tied together, and the combination of the personalities erupted into horrors unmentionable.
Move that branch while you're at it.
I think the fact that they worked together gave them permission to do a great deal more than either of them would have done individually. I don't know if Ng would have ever committed murder. I think he fantasized about it, but I think not until he linked up with Leonard Lake did he actually achieve the courage to actually carry out murder.
On the stand, the defendant is unremorseful.
Ng never took responsibility for any of the crimes. Any time he did testify and made reference to the activities that occurred, he always blamed it on Leonard Lake. It was always Leonard Lake's fault, not his.
Claralyn Balaz, Lake's ex-wife, gives her statement in exchange for full immunity. Ng testifies in his own defense, but the prosecution presents a strong case against him.
The most important piece of evidence, it would be the M-Lady tapes, or the tapes that depicted Brenda O'Connor and Kathy Allen, and the emotional torture that they were inflicted upon them. Charles Ng is depicted in those tapes. He was very involved in it. He wasn't an innocent bystander at all.
After 8 months of testimony and thousands of pieces of evidence, jurors deliberate for 3 days and find Ng guilty of killing 11 people.
We filed on 12 counts of murder. And the ironic thing is that the one count where we did not get a conviction was on the Paul Cosner case. And it was the one who broke this case right from the very beginning.
During the penalty phase, Ng's lawyer tries to convince the jury that Ng is a classic dependent personality who is easily led by Leonard Lake.
This is a man who was starved for some sort of approval, affection, and attention. So there's a dependent quality there, that Charlie's behavior was really dependent on the approval from Leonard Lake.
But that does not change the fact that Ng is cruel and sadistic.
He simply liked to kill people. I think some people like to go fishing, some people like to fly airplanes. Charles Ng simply liked to kill people.
I don't think that Charlie was delusional in the same way that Leonard Lake was delusional. I think he was a sociopath, but I don't think he had any disordered thinking in the same way that we saw in Leonard Lake.
The jury, I believe, was clearly convinced that Ng wanted to be a killer, received permission from Lake to be a killer, and did it.
On June 30th, 1999, Charles Ng is sentenced to death for the murder of 11 men, women, and children. It is a time for relief and remembrance.
We had a memorial service. There were no funerals because there were so many victims that we could not determine their full skeletal remains. Their bodies had been burned, the bones had been crushed. So there was a stone that was erected at the People's Cemetery, and it was in honor and the memory of those who died in the Wilseyville Massacre.
The investigation took its toll not only on the families of the victims, but also on the men and women who solved the crimes.
This case was no doubt the biggest case of my career. And there was a tremendous impact on us psychologically and personally of what we experienced, what we had seen these sadistic killers do.
I think it's easy to label someone as a psychopath, but when you stop and you realize the calculations that these people did in order to accomplish it, they're not nuts. These people were able to calculate and to construe and to murder these people, and then to go to all the trouble that they did to attempt to dispose of the human remains. They're not people incapable of a cognitive process.
I think what will be remembered of Lake and Ng is just the sheer staggering horror of their crimes. Most serial killers, of course, what they do is terrible and tragic, but somehow these people seem to escalate it to heights unprecedented.